We're here with composer Gilda Lyons and pianist, associate producer, everything else, good guy, Robert Frankenberry, and talking about the world premiere of An Anchor in Time, which Resonance Works is giving two concerts, March 3rd and March 5th in Bloomfield and in Carnegie. And so, Gilda, we had a conversation last year uh, about doing a commission for our 10th anniversary and sort of a vague conversation about what I was thinking of what an anniversary piece would look like. And then you just ran with it. And so tell us what we missed. Tell us what happened in
What
between.
happened over that year?
Exactly. And then I got this beautiful score in my inbox, and a lot obviously happened in between. So fill us in.
Yeah, you were actually beautifully specific and vague in what your vision of what this piece was going to be. I mean, we of course we had the instrumentation, and we had two really specific human beings as soloists in mind with Timmy and Dan. But you gave me this direction of what I'm thinking of, because we're marking this 10th anniversary season of Resonance Works, is this idea of looking forward and looking back. Punto. That was it. That's what you that's what you had. And you're like, and I just knew you'd do something interesting with that. But I really wrestled with it. I'm not a literal minded person. I knew that you left it vague so that I could be creative and go to various places. But I loved the idea so much, and it made me think. My dad was a scholar and an English teacher, and he taught me a lot of useless information, is what he joked about, right? And thinking about Janus, the two-faced god, right? That how January really does look in both directions, and it's this pivot and it's a doorway, right? So these are all things that these are the first things that I thought about, right? And how Seamus, my 11-year-old son, taught me that doorways are actually meant to make us forget where we came from. Oh, what real? Tell me more about that, Seamus. Which I loved all of these things, but how I got there really was imagining that precipice, right? And there is that the Heart Crane poem from which Appalachian Spring title is drawn. He has just said, I gained the ledge, right? And that idea of that, bringing that whole journey up to the precipice and then looking out on the expanse ahead of you. That's where I placed myself for this piece, like in writing and in reflecting. That's where I placed myself. And so I loved this idea of ways that we, as in humanity, have looked backward to look forward, like this Big Bang theory. So the second movement is quoting the New York Times 1961 article about how the Big Bang theory looks like it's it, right? How it disproves this continuous creation thing. And also the human genome, right? The mapping of the human genome, this eternal DNA strand that is shared, is something that we now use the mapping of it to look toward the future, and that's the fourth new movement is called Human Genome. But for me, there was nothing that looked forward more than the voices of children. So I interviewed two friends, two 11-year-old friends, and we had, it was just probably the most nourishing time for me toward a project that I've had in a minute, because I got to just carve out space to ask them questions and sit and listen and let them lead for expansive moments, and to talk about what are you looking forward to, and to hear from Lark Wright that about her trip, and about how she's going to England, and I just that's the moment where I cry, because I know this little girl, and because I know that her grandma died unexpectedly last year, and they're going to meet her grandma's old friend out of a way to connect, so it's joyful and it's rooted in a life, and that's really uh it's really where I wanted to be. It's where I always want to be. I want to be looking at the joy and how it's rooted to the full range of what we live as people.
Well, and I think that's something you just do so beautifully. I don't know if there's a piece of yours that I've experienced that doesn't bring a tear to my eye in all of the ways that you just described, right? Because and how you found the most philosophical 11-year-olds that that I think I've ever considered.
Well, between Lark and Seamus, and I mean, I loved Lark is really talking about these joyful, beautiful things, and Seamus is talking about joyful, beautiful things that are rooted in some kind of cosmic, like, I don't know where he comes from, and that's and I don't need to know. I'm just really humbled and grateful. And I'll tell you that, so for anybody watching and listening, the an anchor in time comes from the text, that ends the piece, um, which is by Seamus Hagen, who's my son. And I had brought Seamus into, I've got my very expensive microphone going through my preamp and like all my setup here. And I brought him in to do a recording, just like I went to Lark's house as like the day before she was going to England, right? And I brought all my gear over there just to have the document. And so I'm recording, and we did a thing, and it was interesting and terrific, but it was at the end of the day when we were talking about keeping holidays, and we were talking about tradition, because our traditions evolve, everybody's traditions evolve, but if you do it once in our home, it's a tradition. and um and I said, so Seamus, what is it about that particular aspect of keeping this tradition that you respond to? And that's when he said this incredible thing about, um, every time you do something, you drop an anchor in time. And when you drop them every year in the same way, the anchors become connected, and they're heavy and strong, and they're one, and you can conjure that moment from anywhere in any time. And I'm like, just receiving this gift, and then good night, sweet dreams. And I went and I wrote it down, and then I showed it to him, and I said, this is what I wrote down from what you said last night. Would you be willing to let me set that? Because I'm very, very, I don't trick people into giving me gifts. That's not part of this journey. This is something that I often write down his words, and in this case, I knew that that was the whole point of this piece. And so I took it to them. I was like, you just spoke to exactly where this wants to go and wants to live. Can I share this? And Lark, I knew I was going to end with Lark talking about a sunset, and that transition from sunset into night, both opposites and so powerfully beautiful, and to have them tethered together. And he was yeah, sure, absolutely. I showed him what Lark, my the text about the sunset and how I would intersperse them. Yeah, no, that works. I like that. So I got both their blessings, and I feel like I can't imagine. Like sometimes I get nervous, like, what if that hadn't happened? I don't know what I would do. Like what if I didn't have this piece? So thank you, Maria. Thank you, Resonance Works. I mean, what if I didn't have this piece? This piece gives me um such a gift.
Well, that's a beautiful story. I'm happy to know all of that. And when you talk about looking back and looking forward, I didn't know what you would do with that. I knew it would be brilliant. Because that's what I knew of you, that it would be wise and insightful, and it would touch us all in different ways. And when you look back, you looked way back. Big Bang Theory. We just went as far back as one could go.
I figured let's just do it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, and that movement's really, really fun. We can talk a little bit about the kind of how you set this now, right? Because I read the text when we got the score, and I was excited about it, and I was talking to Brennan, and I was like, oh, did I read the text to you? I read him the whole thing, and he said, did she set all of those words? And I was like, yes, yes, she did. So when you
I guess there are a lot of words.
when you pull that like from the New York Times from 1961, and you approach it in a really interesting and specific way. I'd love to talk about it.
I can tell you I wrote a lot of that. It's interesting. I think I always know what's going to happen before I write anything down. Like I've always got the shape of it. And that one, I had so much of the shape of it that I wrote most of it without any kind of pitch ref. Like I couldn't hear because I was spent a lot of my winter time on airplanes, and I don't use headphones on airplanes because I have to jack up the volume, and it's so, but it worked, like I knew enough about exactly what I wanted it to be, that I was just in my head for that one, and the energy is in stark contrast to to what just happened, and where it's going, certainly. But yeah, I like the idea of space signals. There's some real space signals that are happening there, and and just this kind of energy burst that the because the vocalists are toggling between words and also abstract vocal sounds too.
That's awesome. Well, I got because you took it from the New York Times, I got a kind of radio hour feeling just from the rhythm of the
Yeah.
text and how that's set. And then the space signals you're talking about, they sing this just like high kind of idea. We spent actually a lot of time in the rehearsal last night talking to the strings about how they echo that figure.
Yes, right.
And exactly what you're saying, space signals. Like I imagine a guy in a room in a laboratory staring at a screen that's connected to a telescope on the other side of the planet, waiting for some kind of blip to happen.
Well, and the humans that do this kind of work that would discover this, it's so abstract to me. I don't know, but that's the beautiful nature of what we do, is like I actually go really, really, really deep with my research when it's appropriate. With this, I did my research in terms of like I know who the British astronomer was, and what the context, and there's a lot of text that didn't appear, Brennan, just FYI. there's I really adapted exactly like a very long article into just a handful of lines. But for that, beyond that, I get to then also not know. I get to dream and make the space, conjure the space in sound that I'm imagining, having seen Contact, like like that's gotta be something. But no, really the space, what's the space? And I'm not doing a play on words, but the I think a lot about what's the space we're writing into. And for me, there was a lot of energy and also eternal in this.
Well, and the end is so beautiful with the Star Kingdoms. I mean, my limited experience with your music, it reminds me of that gorgeous ensemble at the end of Sourdough.
Yeah.
That's on Listen, but now we're in Star Kingdoms, and just the wash of sound. And
I did. I'm so glad you that happened because I did that for you. I
um,
actually, that was an intentional sort of reference, abstract enough, but but that is the feeling, because it wants to, especially with these are a lot of angular gestures leading up to this, and then to have it on the word Star Kingdoms be this expansive moment. Yeah,
and it's like an explosion of,
yeah.
and the stardust fallout of that moment. It's so gorgeous. It's one of my favorite parts of the piece.
Stardust Fallout has to be the next piece we work on. There you go.
Write it down. You write things down. Write it down. Well, and you mentioned briefly the first movement, and the first movement, it's sort of a bookend to the last, musically speaking, but
Mhm.
it really sets up this whole journey that we're going to go on with this quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald. And how did you come across that, or how did you find that idea?
You know, I I actually had learned about that, and also the Kierkegaard. And on at different moments in my life, I don't even know how they came into my life, but I had to go searching for both of them, because sometimes you get it paraphrased, and I don't set colloquially, if it's attributed, I'm going to go and do that research and make sure I'm getting it as the author intended. So both the Fitzgerald and the Kierkegaard, I had them as um like as artifacts, that I've just carried with me. And so I did seek them out and made sure that I was getting, oh good, I've got a little more context now. And I love this idea as that's what we do in the theater, right? It's like, come on, draw your chair up close to the edge of the precipice, and I'll tell you a story. Like, that gives me shivers, this idea of, how do we start? It's just, that's what we do, and that's what we do as musicians, right? When we have an event, it's not about any one thing or one person. In my mind, those are the ones that impact me in an ongoing way. Is they're about us coming together to make something that's bigger than any one of us, and then we go away, and it's ephemeral what we do, but it's eternal. So that's kind of what the piece is about. So I really wanted to, for myself, pointedly allow us to inhabit that moment.
What really blew my mind was the third movement, and how you take this Kierkegaard quote, which I'll just, for those who haven't seen this yet, because it's a world premiere, it is quite true what philosophy says, that life must be understood backward, but that makes one forget that life must be lived forward. And you interrupt that with this excerpt from Christina Rossetti, from a poem by Christina Rossetti. Um, to me, that is just so moving.
Because the Kierkegaard is profound, and the Rossetti has the heart of there's soul there. And the Kierkegaard is, it's inviting us to bring our soul, but I wanted to also activate it through Rossetti, because so for those who don't know, because it's a world premiere, as you said, I wish I could remember that first day, first hour, first moment of our meeting time, of your meeting me. So unrecorded did it slip away, so blind was I to see and to foresee. This idea of having something so precious, and in the moment you didn't realize it was precious, and now it's gone, and you want it back. And that speaks so much to this idea of, you know we only understand it looking backward, but we gotta keep going. And I like they're both saying the same thing, um, but they're doing it through, I think, different places. you know,
Yeah, that sort of brings to mind, like, you started early on by talking about, the concept of what a doorway actually does functionally for our memory that is actually beyond our control. It's like it's hardwired. But I'm also thinking about, it's so interesting that movement comes immediately after the Big Bang Theory has irrevocably changed. Like, honestly, that was such a huge thing that we, a generation and a half, 2 generations on, don't even think about. That's
yeah,
just the way it is. But it really changed the world, particularly for Americans, I think. But looking at this philosophy and the juxtaposition of Rossetti and Kierkegaard after that, and sort of thinking about how we don't go back through that door to the time before we're thinking about the Big Bang Theory and the universe had a beginning, but we're also sort of realizing how different times wrestle with the same questions, and how the balance between the humanized lived experience and the like logical or philosophical, sort of like, I'm going to define my experience and understanding. So I'm just fascinated by how that thread goes through, and then we're immediately followed by the genome, which
right.
is, can you talk a little bit about what fascinates you about the genome and why you just had to set that at the center of the piece? Actually, these two movements are kind of the center of the piece.
We're going to have cures that are prescribed to us, you know, like I have a friend whose son is quite sick, and they're talking about using, what is it? Clipper, shredder, what's the thing? They go in and they modify.
CRISPR.
CRISPR.
CRISPR, but
Like
without an
it's
E.
right. Yes. Like that it's in our lifetime that science is able to do things that I know when I was a kid were all sci-fi and all speculative, right? And now these this science is being applied to help people. And um I just this this is such a it can be insular and so abstract to us, like this thing that's happening over there, but I loved the idea of letting it into this space, like to to sit in that for a moment in a place of beauty. And for me it's really just ruminating on it, like honoring this again. This I feel like we are all on a precipice in so many ways. And I think certainly right now culturally change happens faster than ever before in history. So we're continually on a precipice. So getting to have a moment in a in an, a creative reflective space, which is what that movement is, right? To bring in something that to me is really kind of rapid. Maybe if you look at this text and imagine it, you might default to something that was rapid and angular, but it's not. It's very lyric and reflective.
It's currently my wake up in the morning earworm.
Sorry.
The first line of chromosome 1 is, yeah, that is what I've been waking up singing for the last several days. And thank you for that. And it is beautiful. That's the end, right? It's beautiful. So beautiful. Well, it's really fantastic to get to do your music live, because our entire collaborative performance relationship has been digital.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything. Last week on WQED, where we dug out every recording we have of Gilda Lyons pieces, and it was Sourdough, which I did conduct and assemble digitally, and the piece that Timmy sang, and the Folklorico, but those were all for digital performances since 2020. So it's really, really special to do this piece live, to have you with us, airlines willing, live, and to do this together. You're the one that introduced us to Timmy. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
I can, but I might cry. FYI.
Okay, I'm already the edge.
That's okay. I have had to wipe my eyes like 5 times in this conversation already. So you don't get it. You don't get off scot-free either.
Timmy Williams and I met in Chautauqua. I was composer in residence for Chautauqua Opera, and I was writing for her, and I wrote a piece that that you actually programmed on Resonance Works, and that it's a poem by Amy Nizuka Matatiel called End of Summer Hyben. And I really try, both my partner and I are composers and do lots of other things, and we travel a lot for work, but we both work really hard not to be away from our sons for and each other, for more than a couple few weeks, like 3 weeks is kind of the outside that we allow ourselves. We really work to not go more than the 2, but 3 sometimes. But this was like 6-7 weeks. This was the whole summer. I left in the spring and I came back in August. And I'm just mentioning that context because we had a loss in our family, and so I would have had all of the 3 commissions associated with the project done upon arrival, but one of the songs I was still writing when I got there, which was fine. There was plenty of time for her, but it was, I had a plan and I was adjusting, and I was searching through poetry by poets that would be in residence in Chautauqua, and Amy Nizuka Matatiel's work really responded to it. And I responded to her as a person. And she writes about things that are really uncool, like being a happily married person and having kids, like way not edgy and cool culturally, right? And to have the courage to talk about this in her work and be so extraordinary in the work that she's doing is, I find that courageous. And I think I was reading the poem in the context of a lot of poetry to her partner, and I had a default moment of or like that was my default, that I was reading this reflection about her partner. And it was late because the days in Chautauqua are immense, and so I would be composing at 11 p.m. until 2 a.m. and then sleep for a few hours and start again. And so, it's midnight in this idyllic place, and I'm working, and all of a sudden I realized, like with a bolt, this is not a woman talking to her partner. She's talking to her child. It was like, boom, you said, oh, those epiphanies, I love those epiphanies. And it was like, boom. And I just started crying, that like, I either get the goosebumps or I cry. And so I realized this as I'm writing, and then the piece wrote itself, then it was just, so flash forward, and at the time Timmy arrived in Chautauqua very pregnant, and so she gave this premiere while she was carrying her first child, and the poem is about a mother singing to her child, and there are not enough jam jars to can the summer sky at night. Like, she's talking about this fragile moment where you're like, I have a 15-year-old, and it's like, you don't want to ruin the moment when there's a connection and there's something beautiful, right? And that's the whole poem is about. We don't even look at each other because it's perfect, and we don't want to mess with this blessing. And so that there are a number of layers and Timmy brought that to it as an artist, regardless of whether she had been carrying a child or not, but that it was manifest in this way. And I will never forget someone at the premiere coming up to me, and he is a tough guy. He's strong and exudes, like, he gets cast a lot as tough characters and villains, right? And he came up, and I won't curse, and he did multiple times, but he's just got like tears. He's like, she's singing to her kid, and he's like a mess. He's like, and because he had turned to somebody, and he's like, whoa, it was really deep, and there were a lot of layers at work. I'm really grateful for that, the gift of that moment, that commission, that special magical stardust that happened. And so when I found out that she was moving to Pittsburgh and we were working together, I'm like, Maria, you gotta know this person. And so you've now worked with her a number of times, and now she's singing the premiere of this piece. So yay us.
Well, and thank you. I'm sure, our paths would have probably crossed at some point, but it's amazing how they can not, even when you think they might. And to have you be the impetus for that connection is really wonderful, and we're grateful. Timmy's not only doing this piece, she's a soloist for Bach in April and for Macbeth in May. So we're gonna keep her busy. We're
I love it. If there's anyone in the world that should be kept busy, it's Timmy. And she just brought so much of herself and this glorious instrument. But to me, I mean, I don't want to say I take for granted the instrument. It's just that it's not the primary for me. It's like we do take it for granted. You're going to do a great job, but now what else are you going to bring on top of doing a great job? How much of you am I going to see in this? And some people care about that and some people don't. It's at the core of that's how I want to work. It's no longer a luxury to me. That's why I say yes, is because that's what we're going to do now.
Well, and it's so beautiful, that connection. I mean, I feel like we've got this perfect combination, and wait till you hear her sing the double-decker bus.
Oh, I can't wait.
So joyful. And you're right, it's tearful because it's so joyful. And I know you haven't worked with Dan before, but you really, I mean, capture what he does so well. I mean, he does a lot of things very well, but that movement with the Kierkegaard, and then the last movement with Seamus's words about the anchor, it's amplified by their artistry, and it's a really magical connection.
And I haven't worked with Dan, but he has recorded my partner's music, and so I listened again with the score to get a sense of his voice, so that I knew I was really writing for him, and the way that he is willing to go to, he has big robust sounds, but he's also willing to go to that gossamer place. And so yeah, no, absolutely, I can't wait.
And a luxury of riches, because Rob, who is the pianist for this, has also, these are two Gilda Lyons conductors on this call. So Rob, she's talking about herself, but now we can talk about her.
Yes. Well, I mean, Gilda, speaking of doorways and not being able to remember the time before, I actually feel as if there probably never was a time that Gilda Lyons wasn't in my life. Partly because there's the value that you talk about, like, what are you bringing into this? What of you is going to be invested in this? Is that's such a core value for me. So certainly being, and to see, and to have had the chance to see you just keep walking farther and farther out on that limb, or climbing further and further toward that ledge, if we're going to use that analogy. But it's also without needing to point at the score and be like, oh, that's like Fallout and that's like this piece. It's just it's more it's more it's more watching the DNA express itself in different ways. And I just, so when Maria was asking about, like, what should we do, actually it was Maria though, she was like, I'm thinking maybe we should ask Gilda, and immediately I was like, yes, done, end of conversation.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I have little moments of like, what if this piece weren't here? I love this. I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear this thing come to life with you all. So thank you. Thanks for the yes, Maria. Or the floating of ideas and sharing of ideas. I'm so glad to be part of this celebration with you all.
Well, and this has made it so much more special, right? Now we have this beautiful thing that we've helped to create, and we just are excited to have more and more people experience it. I think I said this to somebody the other day. I'm like, if everybody knew how good this was, they wouldn't dare miss it. They wouldn't dare, because they would be missing something really important and significant and special. And that's how we all feel about it.
Thanks, Maria. I'm excited. I really, really, I just can't wait to be in the room.